So, okay, I know it's been a little bit of time since I published the last devlog for my indie game Castlemancer, but I did publish about 10 shorts talking about different improvements or different ways I thought about actually designing Castlemancer, and it received like a ton of comments and suggestions. Now, I combed through all of those comments and suggestions and tried to implement or tried to aggregate and group everything and actually build the stuff you guys suggested. Now, quickly, if you're not familiar, Castlemancer is a roguelike deck builder like Slay the Spire, for example, but kind of the main thing that actually separates the gameplay is the cards you play actually interact with the world. So if you play a fireball card on the map, the fireball actually hits the location of where you place the card. Same thing if you summon a knight or summon a river, whatever it may be. Okay, so what comments or suggestions did you guys actually have that I was able to build in a semi-reasonable time frame? Okay, so first, one comment I kept getting was about the logic or functionality of trap cards. Now, basically the way regular spell cards work are, as soon as you place the card on the map, that's when the card's effect happens. And that's very common in other deck builder games like Hearthstone or Slay the Spire. Then I introduced a trap card mechanic, and this is what people were commenting on. It's basically a card that gets triggered on your opponent's turn rather than your turn. And since it's in the game world, most of the trap-like conditions that were being met was a unit walking onto that card. Now, people felt like it was better if the card actually triggered when a unit left the card, the boundaries of the card, versus as soon as they enter. Kind of the way a landmine operates. It doesn't trigger immediately when you step on it, but once you step off of it, that's when it triggers. Now, I actually thought that was a pretty good idea because it'll lead to more units being hit by that individual trap card, but I didn't want to full out change all of the functionality. So I added a relic that would control this kind of gameplay. Now, relics in my game operate very similar to relics or items in other roguelike deck builder games. It's basically an item that might be stackable or non-stackable, unique or non-unique, that basically alters the gameplay in some way. So maybe giving you permanent damage increases, permanent health increases, changing the way certain spells or units operate. So for this example, I created a relic that shifts the trap card to act more like a landmine rather than the typical trap card functionality. That way you can kind of build the synergies how you want. Now, the next thing was actually a little embarrassing on my part, but people noticed that ranged units were shooting arrows backwards, like the actual little arrow was facing backwards, so I did notice that, and I did fix it, so thank you for that. Now, there were some other comments about the arrow's animation, the way it flies through the air, so I did change the easing on that to make it a little bit more realistic. Another thing people noticed that they weren't super happy with, or they were just kind of annoyed with, was that as soon as you put a summon card in the game world, the little summon unit, or the unit you summoned, wasn't actually like in line with where the character representation was on the card, which I can get is pretty annoying. So I did fix that, so now it should be pretty close to where the actual image on the card is, and then where that image actually spawns into the game world. I also changed up the way summon cards look to make it a little bit more aesthetic and a little bit more interactive, I guess. I'll probably change it and refine it a little bit in the future, but this way it looks a little bit more polished. Now, there were also a bunch of comments about adding more units, big units, monster units, all types of different units. So I spent some time trying to add some additional units. Now, I plan to add a lot more, but, specifically tailored to the bigger or like non-humanoid type of unit. Also, one viewer really wanted bats, so I don't know, I just added a bat. Now, since Castlemancer is, kind of similar to Card Wars from Adventure Time, a lot of people were commenting if they could floop the pig, so yes, you can floop the pig. Then there were some more like convenience suggestions. So one was actually reducing the time to hover for a little tooltip to pop up. So basically these tooltips just show you like more in-depth unit information about kind of the enemies that you're facing, their current health, armor, damage, stuff like that. Before, I had kind of the timer for that pop-up to come a little bit long, so people would recommend that I reduce that amount of time. So I did that, felt a lot better. Another thing was actually the trigger time on the spell animation. So when you drop a card, there was a small delay in when that card was sitting on the ground versus when it would disappear, the animation and all the damage and effects would actually happen. So some people felt like that was a little too long, so I actually trimmed it down to see how that felt, and honestly it felt a lot better. So I thank you guys for that suggestion. Man, I'm just saying that, like, if game devs listen to more of their community, they'd probably fix a lot more problems before release. Now, we don't have to get into that, but so far, a lot of these suggestions have been, you know, feeling pretty good. And some viewers were already reading my mind about future things I wanted to add, like summoning additional objects through that, like, summon card functionality I mentioned earlier, or like terrain. So that still needs to be refined a little bit more, but I was already thinking about that, so they were already kind of 2 steps ahead of me. I wanted to take a quick break and say that this video is sponsored by me, or well, at least the company that I work for, Stash.gg. Now, there was recently a huge court ruling against Apple in the United States, and this ruling really helps game developers. Previously, Apple had a lot of restrictions on developers redirecting to outside stores or payment rails, for example. So the ruling said that both Apple's 27% fee and scare screens for off-app purchases are illegal, effective immediately, which means that in the US, developers can link directly to, say, their web shop directly from their app. They can also advertise their web shops however they want in the app, and actually keep the revenue for themselves instead of giving that 30% cut to Apple, which is such a massive win for game developers that we're basically losing about 30% of their revenue to Apple. So my company Stash has been closely following this ruling, as we try to build products that give the control and power back to the actual game developers instead of to Apple and Google. So we recently released a new product called Stash Pay that makes this super easy. Stash Pay is basically frictionless iOS payments with a built-in loyalty program. Stash Pay supports one-click purchases, pre-filled payment information, bonus currencies, free rewards, self-service to our Stash Studio portal, and just one line of code to integrate. So if you want to learn more about what we're doing at Stash, you can find the link in the description below. And if you're actually interested in integrating with Stash Pay, you can just email me at michael@stash.gg. All right, thanks, and back to the video. So that covered most of the suggestions or advice that I saw. So I wanted to make this video to show that, like, hey, I actually do read the comments and I do consider the suggestions you guys write in there. Now, I'm not going to say I implement every single suggestion, because sometimes it just doesn't work with the technology or the systems that I built, or, you know, I don't know if that's the exact direction I want to go in, but honestly, a lot of these suggestions are kind of where I was headed, and honestly, were just really good in general. So keep at it. Now, there were a bunch of other improvements that weren't suggestions from those videos that I've been implementing since the last devlog. So I began reworking the overworld map that actually controls, like, what levels you're going into. So something similar to, like, Slay the Spire's overworld map. Before, I had a very rudimentary, like, stage kind of system. I completely reworked that flow. It looks a lot better right now. I still have to make some improvements, some expansions to the map, but it's going in a much better kind of direction. I also did a massive rework on the logic of enemy movement patterns. So now they actually use, like, proper pathfinding algorithms instead of just using, like, straight lines trying to get to stuff. So that'll make, like, object detection and movement on the map when you summon objects just a lot more realistic. I also changed the way they interact with the bonus building system. So before, I had these things called bonus buildings, and if you didn't destroy them, they would just keep shipping out upgrades to the enemy units, like extra health, extra damage, extra armor. But now I've simplified that, or, you know, switched it so it wasn't so OP, where enemy units now actually have to walk back to their base to get those bonuses, and it's not all of the enemies at once. You know, it's determined by, you know, kind of random logic that I implemented on the enemy manager, so that they know when and when they shouldn't go back to base to get these benefits. That way, it also opens up a little bit of gameplay where maybe you want to keep the bonus buildings alive, but set trap cards up kind of in front of the base and they get triggered, so you can kind of, like, play around with, you know, object placement and stuff. I also improved the way, like, floating damage numbers come up. I integrated this package called Damage Numbers Pro. Honestly, fantastic, so big shout out to them for that. And the last major change I made was the way loot kind of got animated or got shown when you actually completed a stage. I wanted it to feel super rewarding when you completed a stage and got loot, so it's kind of like a beneficial feedback loop. and I was like pretty inspired the way Vampire Survivors has done it. So I kind of wanted to implement something similar to that, where like the loot animation kind of like explodes out and all of these items are kind of like floating around, and you know, just looks a lot better. I'll probably refine it a little bit more in the future, but right now I think it's kind of in a good state. Now that covers most of the changes, so I've been pretty heads down in actually doing the development of it. So I am trying to get a demo out, the most polished demo I can, as fast as I can. So, you know, I still work full time, so I kind of have to balance that. But, you know, thank you so much for watching. Wishlist Castlemancer over on Steam. Let me know if you have any other suggestions for features, improvements, anything you might want to see in the game. Again, I kind of go through all the comments and I read through the suggestions, so I really value that. That's all from me. We do a bad British accent at the end of every video, and hopefully I see you in another one. Bye-bye.